Hi, this is John with Cloth Guru, and in this tutorial we will finish up creating the butterfly for the white linen image. So in the last tutorial we went over how to model this butterfly, and hopefully I didn't go too quick. I think I forgot to mention that this butterfly has subdivision surface modifiers all over it so that it's nice and smooth, and you can see what it looks like without those on. But the modeling is pretty simple, really, for this butterfly. These wings should actually be set to smooth. I didn't even do that. So in this tutorial we're going to look at how to create the fur on the butterfly, as well as set up the shading for the butterfly, the shading and the texturing. So the fur is something that I've actually become quite fond of in Blender. I think it actually works pretty well, and it is fairly easy to set up, and it gives very nice looking results. So let's go ahead and jump into how to do the fur. So first of all, to do the fur, you're going to need an object to grow fur on. If you've already been following along with the butterfly tutorial and you have a body, that is what we're going to put our fur on. So go ahead and select the body, and we're going to come here to our Particles tab. Here in the Particles tab, there are a ton of settings, and so don't get basically don't what am I trying to say? Don't be intimidated by all the settings in here. You don't have to touch most of them, but there are some that you're going to want to know about. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to my fake butterfly that I started over here, this fake butterfly body, and we're going to start from scratch on it. So we'll go ahead and look at this in the top view, and I'm going to come to my particle tab, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say new, because I want to add a new particle system. It's a good idea to get in the habit of naming your particle systems, especially if you're going to have more than one in the scene. So I'm going to call this butterfly hair, and we will call this butterfly hair settings, because these are the settings for the hair. So if we look at our actual images of the butterfly actually has a lot of little fur. It's got little fur all over here, on the thorax, on the head, on the abdomen. Even on the wings, there's little hairs, little furry hairs. And so this butterfly is actually pretty furry. And I knew up front that I was going to just rely on texture for the fur on the wings. I could have added fur on the wings if I wanted to. I didn't actually do that because I knew I wasn't going to be looking at it too close up. But you could actually add fur on the wings as well if you wanted to. But I relied on the fur fully actually to get most of the coloring of this yellow on the head and on the thorax of the butterfly. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to come in here to our particle settings, and we're going to go to our type, and we're going to set it from emitter to hair. So what this does, the particles in Blender can either be particles, which if I hit play here, you'll notice particles start to come out of my butterfly. That's not what we want. We want hair to actually come out of the butterfly. And this is not animated, so it's static hair, although you can simulate it with the hair dynamics. But we get this crazy configuration of fur here. Obviously it's way too long. So we're going to start off by shortening it with the hair length. And then in here I'm going to make sure to click the Advanced tab, because there's some settings there that we're going to want to change. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click off Even Distribution, and I'm going to click on Random to get some random, just random places where the fur is showing up. One thing I want to do really quickly though is I want to make sure my normals are facing the right way. If you start to do fur and it looks weird, it could be that your normals are facing the wrong direction. So go ahead and make sure that your normals are facing the right way, and you can do that by going into edit mode and selecting normals. So if these normals happened to be flipped, for example, let me show you what that would look like. Let's just flip the normals. You'll notice I'm getting no fur now. It's because the fur is actually growing on the inside. So the fur relies on the normals to be correct. So let's recalculate them to the outside, and then my fur is on the outside. Now you'll say, well, wait, the fur looks like it's all crazy in crazy places here. Yes, it does, doesn't it? Click this Use Modifier Stack on. Because we're using a subsurf modifier here, and we're also using this edge split, it does kind of funky things to the mesh. So let me increase my edge split there so I get rid of that sharp edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this. Whoa, did not want to do that. Apply, apply. Now I'm not going to have any problems with the fur using, kind of interpreting the modifiers. Or you can just click on Use Modifier Stack. Okay, so that's the deal there. So here I have fur all over. Now you would be tempted to increase the number of hairs here, but we don't want to do that. We could just pump this up until we've got a really furry butterfly. The problem with that is there is a better way to do this. With fur, you generally have what are called guide hairs. For fur or hair, you have what are called guide hairs. And those guide hairs are then interpolated, and you draw children hairs between all of the guide hairs. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to sculpt and groom the fur and hair with a smaller number of guide hairs, and then interpolate all the rest of the fur to fill it out, to make it nice and full. And if you want to actually see what those children hairs are looking like, if I come down to children here and I turn on interpolated, all of a sudden you'll see, holy cow, this is one furry butterfly, because we've added in a whole ton of fur here. And this, we're actually only displaying 10 children objects per guide fur. If we actually show the 100 that would render, that's what it's going to look like. Way too furry. So I'm going to bring the render down to 10, and I'm going to bring the children down to 10. That's even too much. I can bring this down to something like 5 maybe. Make sure this is on 5. That's probably closer to what we'll actually use. Okay, so something like that with the children. So the next section that we're going to look at, we don't need to care about hair dynamics because we're not simulating this. Velocity doesn't matter because we're not simulating it. We don't need to look at rotation or physics either. We're going to dive right into the render section. So a couple things here. We want to make sure the render emitter is turned on. Actually, this doesn't matter for fur. It's going to render anyway, whether or not this is checked on. But this right here is the material that your fur will use to render. So we'll talk about materials in a little bit here when we go into shading the rest of the butterfly. But just know that if I create a material over here, like let's use the body material, and I come back over to my particles, by default it's going to use whatever slot is assigned to your emitter object. So if I create a new material here, and this material is going to be fur, if I come back here, I want to make sure that I'm using the fur material to render. So very important. We'll look at materials a little bit more in detail here in a second. So coming on down to our children, there's really not a lot here in the children that we need to play with. We could play with some things if we wanted to make this fur wavy, if we wanted to do something crazy to it, give it a little bit of variation in here, we could do that. I did not do any of that. I just left it on the default. Um, I didn't do anything with the field weights. And yeah, with cycles rendering, we'll do a little bit, but we'll look at that in a moment. So really, you just need to have interpolated turned on with the children. That's pretty much the only thing you need on in there. What we're going to do next is we're actually going to groom the fur. So let's go ahead and come to object mode down here, and we're going to choose particle edit. And what this will do is it will take us into our particle edit mode, and we can see what the fur will look like. We can actually groom it. Once we go into particle edit mode, these settings up here will be turned off. You cannot edit them anymore. So if I come in here and I choose comb and I start combing my fur like this on my butterfly, and then I decide, okay, actually I want to change the length. Well, I can't do that anymore. I can go ahead and I can free the edit, but I'm going to lose any of my grooming changes. So if I do that, you'll notice I lose my groom. So you want to make sure these settings are exactly what you want them to be before you go in and start grooming. So once you start grooming, you can take the comb tool here, and I can start just combing my butterfly. Give him a nice combed look. And then I can come in here and I can choose the cut tool. And the butterfly, if you look at the image, it doesn't have a lot of fur in the middle. It has a lot of fur on the sides. And so what I did with the cut tool is I came in here and I basically just started giving him a haircut and cutting out hairs in the middle that I didn't want. Cut, 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 more, 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 more. So you basically just go like this and keep cutting until you get rid of all the hairs you don't need. And then this butterfly has kind of longer hairs here. They're kind of like tufts. And so I went in here to my length and I chose grow, and I went ahead and I grew these guys out along the side here. Grew them, nice and thick, and then maybe I comb them out a little bit more. Something like this. And then maybe I come in here and I cut these guys back so they're not sticking out so much. Not sticking out weird. So there's kind of the basics of how I might start grooming this butterfly. And you can see what the end product looked like here if I zoom in on my butterfly. So that's basically it. That's how it looked when I finished grooming him. Not really all that complicated. I have some crazy hairs coming out his face there. I didn't care about those because they don't show up in the render. I could go ahead and cut those off though if I wanted to be a perfectionist. But that is the basics of grooming the fur. Fairly easy. One thing that might be useful when you're grooming in here is you can visualize the actual vertices of the hair as you're combing it, which is very useful to be able to see those and see how it's moving those, or you could visualize just the vertices along the tip of the hair. So that's nice to be able to do as well. And this will you'll just get the lines. So those are nice to do. One thing you can do, if you choose none here in your particle edit mode, you can actually choose, we got to turn our particles on. You can actually come here to individual hairs, and if I wanted to, I could actually just translate this hair. You see, I can just pull it out here. I can even turn on my proportional editing tool, and I can grow the region of influence, except it doesn't seem to be growing here. Grow, 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 maybe not. Okay, maybe you can't. I thought that you could. Maybe I was just going crazy that day. Okay, well, I guess not. But you can come in here and you can grab the hairs and you can move them around, or you can alternately, I could select this whole hair. If I select one of the vertices and I do Control plus, 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 I can select the whole hair and I could delete that hair if I don't want it. I can delete just a particle if I don't want it, like so. So that's the way you can get some fine grain um, modifications to your hairs. If you need to do that, just turn this on none, and you can go ahead and yeah, basically groom your hair the way you want it. So there we go, that's grooming. So on to the next part of this butterfly. Let's delete these pieces that we made. They're just kind of sitting out here at the origin. So the next part of this butterfly is we need to texture this guy. Texture and set up materials. So to do that, we need to make sure we first UV unwrap it. I hate doing UVs, but unfortunately they're a part of life. So if we come into edit mode here, and let's go ahead and let's go to the wing image. So all I've done to UV unwrap this, I unwrapped it in a planar projection, so I was actually looking at it from the top view, and I hit U and I said project from view to create these UVs along the wing here, and I did the same thing here. So you notice if I select these and I actually show my bottom wing, that it lines up there with the UVs. The body, all I did with the body was I came along here and I cut it up into its various pieces. If you don't know how to do this, to UV unwrap in Blender is pretty simple. Go look up a tutorial on it, but I'll tell you really quick. Basically, if I come and I show my edges, and I got to that menu, by the way, by hitting Control Tab, Edge, and I come in here and I select my edges, and I can hold Shift Alt to select along along this edge length here, along all these edges, and basically I hit Control E and I say mark seam, and what that does is it marks this so that when I unwrap the UVs it will cut it along that seam. So that's all I did, was I created seams along this whole butterfly. I segmented here, and I created seams here and here. And then I selected the whole thing and I hit U and I said unwrap, and it unwrapped it just like this. And then I positioned those here in my UV editor. And let's go ahead and look at this with the body images on, and that is how I got my UV layout. Now a note about the UV layout for texturing. You can come in here and you can say export UV layout. This is super useful. So if I hit export UV layout, it'll say where do you want to put this, and I can export a PNG image here, or it could be looks like an EPS or an SVG, and you can specify a size, and I did 1024, and you can export that image, which you can then bring into Photoshop to help you with your texturing. And so that is the basics of how you go in and you start to texture your butterflies. You make sure you've got all your pieces UV unwrapped, and then we're going to export all those pieces. I don't think I even UV unwrapped the legs. It looks like I didn't do that at all, because I knew they were just going to be a solid black material. Looks like I didn't UV unwrap those either. And the eyes, let's see. The eyes, and this is interesting. So the eyes, instead of UV unwrapping the eyes the way I did those other ones, I actually just left the default UVs, which basically will put each square within the 0 to 1 space. So what that's going to do, if I come here to the texture, is each square is actually going to show the image. And you'll notice I just left the body image on here. I didn't even bother to put a real image in here for the eyes, because when you zoom out it actually kind of looks like eyes, like all the little eye segments. So I left each of those squares at its default of 0 to 1, and that will happen when you create a sphere here. If I create a UV sphere here in my 3D view, and if we unwrap this, you'll notice what happens. It places each of those squares within the 0 to 1 space. And so if I, set this texture onto this, let's set the body texture on here, you'll see it just tiles that over and over again on those squares. And that, I looked at that and I said, oh, it looks kind of like eyes. And so I just left it. Um, but yeah, that's how I did the eyes. Not too fancy. So that's all the UV unwrapping. So we're going to stop the tutorial here, and in the next tutorial we'll look at how to texture this and do materials. Thanks, bye.